Imagine a cold, dark night. You hear the deep rumble of longships hitting the shore, then the shouts, the screams. Fires light up the sky, painting a terrible picture. In the morning, the Vikings celebrate. They sit at long tables, their faces red from drink and fire. There is gold, silver, and fine cloth all around them. Loud songs fill the air. Everyone thinks about the great treasure they have found, the shining gold and silver taken from fallen towns. They cheer for their brave warriors. But what if I told you that the real prize, the biggest treasure for the Vikings, was not gold at all? What if something far more valuable, far more needed, was taken that day? Something that did not shine, but was precious in a different, darker way. What if the true spoils of Viking attacks were not shiny metals, but something living, breathing, and full of fear? What happened to the women when their homes fell to Viking raiders? These were not just any women. They were queens, princesses, noble daughters, and simple women from every village. When their worlds crashed down, what was their fate? Were they just spared, left behind to rebuild what was lost? Or was their future far, far darker? Were they taken as simple captives? Or was there a deeper, more terrible plan for them? The truth is chilling. We will look at stories of entire towns where all the women were taken away, forced onto ships and sent to new lands. We will hear about a princess who lived in silent fear for many years, pretending she could not speak, just to keep her true self a secret. We will learn about nuns who chose to die in flames, rather than face a fate worse than death at the hands of their attackers. We will see how noble women, born to comfort and power, became nothing more than things to be traded, like pieces on a chessboard. And we will discover how some captives were forced to settle new lands, and others faced the most horrible end of all, becoming sacrifices. These are not just old tales from dusty books. These are not exciting scenes from a movie. These are the darkest secrets of the Viking Age, hidden truths that have been lost in time until now. Have you ever wondered what terrible choices people made when their homes were attacked and everything they knew was ripped away? What would you do to protect your family, your identity, or your spirit? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want to help us uncover more hidden truths and untold stories, hit that subscribe button right now. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every new person helps us keep these forgotten voices alive. Also, tell us where you are watching this from. Our first story takes us to the green, wet coast of Ireland in the year 821. There was a town called Aier. It was not a very big town, but it was important. It sat right on the coast, a good place for ships to come and go. It was a place where people lived simple lives, fishing and farming, believing they were safe. But safety was a fragile thing in those times. One day, the calm of Aier was shattered. Dark longships, with their dragon heads carving through the waves, appeared on the horizon. The Vikings had arrived. The old books, called the Annals of Ulster, which kept records of what happened in those years, wrote a simple, chilling line about that day. It said, "Aier was plundered, women carried off." Just like that. A town attacked, and its women taken. What does carried off truly mean? It means they were stripped of everything that made them who they were. Their names, the names their mothers and fathers gave them, were taken away. They were no longer mothers, sisters, daughters, or wives. In the eyes of their captors, they were no longer people. They were changed into something else, something terrible, thralls. This was a word the Vikings used for property, for slaves. Imagine that. One moment, you are a person with a family and a home. The next, you are just a thing, like a tool or an animal, owned by someone else. They were no longer free. They had no rights. Their lives were not their own. The immediate horror was being forced onto the longships. These were the very ships that brought the destruction. Now they were used to carry human cargo. Imagine the cramped, cold spaces, the smell of the sea, mixed with fear and despair, the rough wood under their feet, the constant rocking of the waves. Many of these women, perhaps already weakened by the attack on their town, did not survive the journey. The long trips across the cold, open sea were brutal. Only the strongest, the most determined to hold on to life, made it to the other side. They were not just fighting the Vikings. They were fighting the ocean, the cold, the hunger, and the fear that ate at their very souls. Once they arrived, their terrible journey was far from over. These women were not brought to a new home. They were brought to markets, huge markets, like the ones in Dublin, where goods were bought and sold. But these were not goods made of wood or metal. These were human beings. They were lined up, looked over, and treated like animals. A woman from Aier could be bought for about 12 to 20 ounces of silver. To give you an idea, that was about the same price as 2 or 3 cows. Think about that for a moment. A human life valued the same as a key. Few farm animals. Their new owners could be Vikings themselves, or traders from far-off lands. These women were then spread across huge areas. Some ended up in Hedeby, a big Viking trading town in what is now Germany. Others were taken to Birka, in Sweden. Some went even further, to the grand cities of Byzantium, or to the rich lands of the Abbasid Caliphate, far to the east, in the lands we now call the Middle East. They were torn from their homes, their families, and their culture, never to return. The most heartbreaking part of this story is the legacy. Not a single name of these women from Aier was written down. Not one. They were simply women. Their lives, their hopes, their fears, their very existence were erased from history. They became nothing more than a number in an inventory, a simple entry in an old book that counted things that were bought and sold. Their stories were swallowed by the silence of time. They were just part of the Viking loot, a simple line in the books of war, taken, counted, silenced. Now let's turn to a more personal story, one that gives us a small window into the incredible strength of one woman. This is the story of Melora, a princess, the daughter of a king, who faced a similar fate in the mid-10th century. Melora was an Irish princess. She was born to a life of comfort, to a royal family. But like so many others, her world was turned upside down by a Viking raid. She was captured, dragged from her home, and taken across the sea. Her journey ended far from Ireland, in the cold lands of Norway, where she was sold. Her buyer was a powerful Icelandic chieftain named Hoskuld. He was a wealthy man, important in his own country. He paid a high price for Melora, 24 ounces of silver. This was an astonishing amount. Remember the women from Aier, who sold for 12 to 20 ounces? Melora, being a princess, was worth even more. It was about 3 times the price of a good cow. Think about how much they valued her, not as a person, but as a possession. This was not a rescue, it was a purchase. But Melora was not an ordinary captive. She made a shocking choice, a very brave and desperate one. She decided to live in silence. For years, she pretended she could not speak. Imagine that. Every day, for years, she kept her lips sealed, even though she knew how to talk. She lived as if she were mute, unable to say a single word. Why would she do this? She did it to protect her identity. She was a princess, a daughter of a king. If the Vikings knew her true background, they might use her or hurt her or demand an even bigger price for her. By pretending to be a simple, silent slave, she tried to protect herself, to keep a tiny piece of her royal self hidden. During her time with Hoskuld, Melora bore a son. She named him Olaf. She raised him, always keeping her secret. She spoke to him in gestures, in soft hums, never in words. She taught him silently, her love pouring out without a single sound. Her son grew up believing his mother could not speak. He never knew the truth of her royal blood, the proud lineage that flowed through her veins and his. The truth, however, has a strange way of coming out. It was revealed by accident years later. Young Olaf, now a boy, was outside. He was playing, or perhaps exploring. He heard some Irish traders talking nearby, and in that moment, something clicked inside him. He understood some of their words. He hurried back to his mother, excited, and spoke to her about what he had heard. And Melora, for the first time in years, forgot herself. She responded to her son in Gaelic, her native tongue, the language of her homeland, the language of her royal family. The secret was out. Hoskuld, her owner, was surprised and probably a little angry that she had fooled him for so long. But he also realized the importance of the woman he owned. He learned of her royal background, her high birth. The legacy of Melora is a mix of sorrow and quiet triumph. Her son, Olaf, later became a very important man in Iceland. He was known as Olaf the Peacock, a respected chieftain, and he was indeed acknowledged as royal, thanks to his mother's true identity. His children and grandchildren became powerful families in Iceland. But Melora herself, she never returned to Ireland. She never saw her homeland again. She died a captive in Iceland, far from the throne she was born to, far from her family. Her life was marked by silence, sacrifice, and a stolen identity, but her strength lived on through her son. Bought, hidden, known. Our next story takes us to the bleak shores of Scotland. In the year 870, the great heathen army, a huge force of Viking warriors, was marching. They were like a storm, destroying everything in their path. Their target was Coldingham Monastery. This was a holy place, where nuns lived quiet lives dedicated to God. It was a place of peace, far from the violence of the world. But no place was truly safe from the Vikings. The soldiers saw monasteries not just as places of prayer, but as places of wealth. They knew there would be valuable things there, and often women. The leader of the nuns at Coldingham was the Abbess Aier the Younger. She was a woman of strong faith and even stronger will. As the Viking army got closer, she knew what awaited her and her sisters. She knew the terrible fate that often befell women, especially holy women, when captured by Viking raiders. It was not just death she feared, but something far worse, something that would destroy their souls. In an act that shows unbelievable courage and despair, Abbess Aier did something shocking. She sliced off her own nose and lips. Imagine the pain, the blood, the sheer horror of this act. But she did not stop there. She then told her nuns, her sisters in faith, to do the same. This was not a simple request. This was an order born of desperate love and a will to protect their honor at any cost. She asked them to make themselves ugly, to remove their beauty, to make themselves unwanted, to save themselves from a terrible fate. She asked them to disfigure themselves so that the Vikings would not want them, would not take them alive. The immediate aftermath was horrific. When the Vikings broke into the monastery, they found the nuns. They found women with faces terribly cut and bleeding. They found women who had destroyed their own beauty. The Vikings, seeing that their prize was ruined, became enraged. They had come for wealth, yes, but also for women. And these women had denied them that. In their fury, they set the monastery on fire. They burned it to the ground. All the women, the brave nuns who had mutilated themselves, died in the flames. The long-term consequence of this act was not submission. It was not surrender. It was the ultimate act of defiance. They chose fire. They chose death. They chose it over dishonor, over violation, over being taken as slaves. Their final act was not one of weakness, but of incredible power. They chose their own end, on their own terms, to protect their inner selves. Their bodies were destroyed, but their spirits remained unbroken. The legacy of Abbess Aier and her nuns lives on as a story of martyrs. They are remembered as women who stood against the darkest evil, who chose the hardest path to protect what they held most dear. Their bones mixed with the ash and soil of their burned monastery, a silent testament to their unbreakable spirit. Their sacrifice was a statement that some things are more precious than life itself. Burned, buried, brave. Let's move to a different kind of horror, one that shows women being used as tools, as pawns in a much larger game of power and money. This happened in England, in the city of Canterbury, between the years 1011 and 1012. England was under constant attack by Viking armies, hungry for land and riches. One of the most feared Viking leaders was Thorkel the Tall. He led a massive siege on Canterbury, a very important city in England, both for its wealth and its religious meaning. The city tried to hold out, but tragedy struck from within. There was a betrayal. Someone on the inside opened the gates, letting the Vikings pour in. The city fell. The Vikings captured many important people, the archbishop, the leaders of the city, and many noble women. These were women from rich and powerful families, used to a life of privilege. Now, their lives were in the hands of the invaders. The shocking act was not that these women were killed. They were spared from the slaughter. But this was not an act of mercy. It was an act of calculation. The Vikings knew the worth of these women. They saw them as valuable, not as people, but as bargaining chips. These noble women became hostages. They were kept alive because their lives were worth more to the Vikings as a tool than as something to be thrown away. They were held captive for many months, in fear and uncertainty, their fate hanging in the balance. For months, these women, along with other captured leaders, were held by Thorkel the Tall and his men. They were not prisoners of war in the modern sense. They were part of a chilling trade. Their freedom, their very lives, were tied to a staggering amount of money. The Vikings demanded a huge ransom for the city and its people. This ransom was known as Danegeld, a payment made by the English to the Vikings to stop their attacks. But in this case, it was specific. The release of these noble women and other important people was tied to a payment of £48,000 of silver. Imagine that amount of silver. It was a fortune, an almost impossible sum for the English kingdom to gather. The long-term consequences meant that these women's lives were reduced to cold, hard numbers. They became line items in the country's accounts, part of the national payment to the invaders. Their fear, their suffering, their stolen time, all became part of a financial deal. They were not seen as individuals who had suffered greatly, but as units of value, tools to get what the Vikings wanted. Their experiences, their trauma, became lost in the history books that focused on kings and battles and money. Their legacy is not one of personal story, but of a grim statistic. They represent all the women who were used as a means to an end, whose worth was measured in silver, not in their humanity. They were living proof that during Viking attacks, women were often not random victims, but a calculated part of the spoils. Captured, ransomed, lost. Next, we go to a place of strong stone, a fortress known as Dumbarton Rock in what is now Scotland. This was in the year 1870, the same year as the Coldingham tragedy. Dumbarton Rock was a natural stronghold, a huge hill of stone rising sharply from the ground, surrounded by water. It was a powerful place, the capital of a kingdom called Strathclyde. For months, the Vikings, led by two famous kings, Olaf the White and Ivar the Boneless, laid siege to it. A siege means they surrounded it completely, not letting anyone or anything in or out. For 4 long months, the people inside Dumbarton Rock held out. They had food, but the Vikings cut off their water supply. Imagine the thirst, the slow torture of it, day after day, week after week. The defenders grew weaker and weaker, their throats dry, their hopes fading. Finally, with no water left, they had to surrender. Their bodies were tired, their spirits broken by thirst. The shocking act that followed was a mass enslavement. When the fortress fell, the Vikings did not just take gold or weapons, they took the people. The old writings tell us that 200 Viking ships were filled with treasure and, even more importantly, with human captives. Imagine the sight of all those ships, laden not just with shiny things, but with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of frightened, tired people. Among those taken were the most important people of Strathclyde. King Arthgal, the ruler of Dumbarton, was captured. His wife, the Queen, was also taken, and with them, many noble women, their daughters, and women from all parts of the surrendered city. They were forced onto the ships, just like the women of Aier, but this time in much larger numbers. The people of an entire kingdom were now slaves. The long-term consequences were devastating. Entire communities, entire families were broken apart. They were absorbed into the vast slave economy of the Viking world. Many of them were taken to Dublin, a major Viking stronghold and slave market in Ireland, a city that had become a hub for buying and selling human lives. From there, they would likely be sold again, perhaps across Europe, never to see their homes or their loved ones again. Their culture, their language, their identity, all threatened with erasure. The legacy of Dumbarton Rock is stark. This was not just a battle where some people were accidentally caught in the middle. This was not collateral damage. The taking of captives, the enslavement of a whole population, was one of the main goals of the attack. The people, especially the women, were a valuable prize, a resource to be exploited. Their capture was not a side effect of war, it was the very reason for it. Attacked, thirsty, shipped away, our stories often focus on the raids, the battles, the taking. But what happened after the taking? What happened to the women who survived the raids, the sea journeys, and the slave markets? Our next segment looks at the late 9th century, a time when Vikings were not just raiding, but settling new lands. We go to Iceland, a wild, beautiful island in the North Atlantic. This was a land that was mostly empty. The Vikings came to make it their new home. The conflict for women in this story is different. It's not about being plundered and immediately sold. It's about being plundered and forced into a new life, a new family, a new nation. The old Icelandic book, the Landnámabók, which means Book of Settlements, tells the story of how Iceland was settled. It lists the first settlers, mostly men, who came from Norway. But it also hints at where many of their wives came from. Raiding expeditions, which happened before and during the settlement, brought back many women captives from Ireland and Scotland. These women were not asked if they wanted to come. They were simply taken. The shocking act here is that these women were forced into marriage. They became the unwilling wives of the settlers. Imagine being torn from your home, your family, your culture, and then being forced to marry a man from a different land, speaking a different language. You are meant to be his wife, to bear his children, to help him build a new life in a harsh, cold place you never chose. These women carried deep wounds, both seen and unseen. They carried the loss of their past, the pain of their capture, and the burden of a life they never wanted. Some of these women are named in the old books, like Refgard, an Irish woman who became a settler's wife. But for every Refgard, there were countless others whose names are lost to time, simply listed as the wife of, or not mentioned at all. They were just part of the resources needed to build a new society. They worked the land. They raised children. They endured. They were the foundation of a new nation, but they were not there by choice. The long-term consequences of this forced settlement are still visible today. Modern science, through DNA evidence, has uncovered a powerful truth. Studies show that a large number of the founding women of Iceland, as much as 63%, had Celtic DNA. This means they came from Ireland and Scotland. The men were mostly Norse, but a big part of the women who started the Icelandic nation were forced captives. This is a powerful, silent testimony to the violence of the Viking Age. The legacy of these women is that a new nation, Iceland, was literally built on forced unions. The bloodlines of this country, its very roots, have violence woven into them. The courage and suffering of these unwilling wives shaped the future of an entire country. They were taken, brought across the sea, and forced to become part of a new world, a world where their children and grandchildren would never know their original homeland. Plundered, transported, made to stay. Our final story takes us to a very different kind of setting, a silent one, buried deep in the earth for over 1,000 years. This is the story of the spectacular Oseberg ship burial discovered near Oslo in Norway in 1904. It was one of the richest and most amazing Viking grave finds ever. Inside a huge burial mound, a beautifully carved Viking ship lay buried, filled with treasures and containing the remains of 2 women. The main person in the burial was an elderly woman. Many historians believe she was a powerful queen, or perhaps a priestess, someone of very high status in Viking society. But alongside her, buried in the same ship, was another woman. This second woman was younger, and her story is one of the darkest secrets of the Viking Age. The shocking act was revealed centuries later by science. When experts studied the younger woman's remains, her DNA told a surprising story. It was traced to a distant land, far from Norway, the Black Sea region, or perhaps even Iran. This meant she was almost certainly a foreign captive, brought from very far away. She was not a Norwegian local. She was not a free woman. She was a slave, a prize from a distant raid. Before her death, there was a strange shift in her life. Tests on her bones show that her diet changed suddenly. For a short time before she died, she ate very rich, good food, the kind that only very important people ate. This suggests she was brought into an elite household, perhaps to serve the powerful elderly woman, her mistress, in her final days, or in a special way leading up to the burial. The long-term consequence for this younger woman was horrifying. She was not honored by this burial. She was not respected. She was sacrificed at her mistress's funeral. She was forced to serve in death, just as she likely served in life. It was a brutal custom where valuable slaves were killed and buried with their owners to continue serving them in the afterlife. Her presence in that grand ship was not a sign of her importance, but of her ultimate unimportance as a free person. She was a possession, one that could be taken even into the grave. The legacy of the Lady of the Oseberg ship is a grim reminder of the absolute power some Vikings held over others. This young woman, brought from so far away, was not given a dignified end. She was not mourned for herself. Her presence in that lavish burial was not a sign of honor, but proof of ownership. Her life and her death were dictated by others, a chilling testament to the darkest aspects of Viking rule. Bound, buried, forgotten. We have journeyed through some truly dark corners of history today. We have seen that for the Vikings, women were not just a small part of their wars. They were not just a side effect of their conquests. They were, in many ways, the true and most valuable spoils of war. They were seen as property, as tools, as prizes to be won, bought, and used. We remembered the women of Aier whose names were erased, becoming nothing more than numbers in a chilling inventory. We saw Melora, the Irish princess, who chose silence for years, a desperate act to protect her identity, only to die a captive far from home. We learned of the unimaginable courage of Abbess Aier and her nuns, who chose fire and death over dishonor, their spirits unbroken. We saw the noble women of Canterbury, reduced to bargaining chips, their lives valued in silver, not in humanity. We witnessed the mass enslavement at Dumbarton Rock, where entire communities were shipped away, their capture being a main goal of the Viking attack. We understood how new nations, like Iceland, were built on the forced unions of plundered women, violence woven into the very bloodlines of a new land. And finally, we uncovered the tragic story of the young captive in the Oseberg ship, brought from a distant land only to be sacrificed, forced to serve even in death. Their names may have been lost to the winds of time, their voices silenced by history. But today we have spoken them again. We have shone a light on these forgotten truths, these darkest secrets. We hope their stories remind us of the strength of the human spirit, even in the face of the greatest horrors. If these stories have touched you, if they have made you think, please help us keep these hidden truths alive. Hit that subscribe button right now to join our growing community. We are working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every new person helps us tell more forgotten tales. Also, tell us in the comments which of these stories shocked you the most. And don't forget to tell us where in the world you are watching from. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.